All right, thank you all for joining us for today's Roy Talks, a conversation with the artist whose work is on exhibit at Roy currently through July 1. I'll start by thanking sponsors, as we do. So Ohio Arts Council, Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Columbus Foundation, the Encova Foundation. Thank you for their support. Makes things like this possible. So we're just sort of experimenting now with hybrid situations. So we have a couple of artists in the gallery and Douglas is online. Amanda is very sorry, but she can't make it today. Questions to her could be directed to her Gmail or her Instagram. And both of those accounts are Forged Faces. And so she welcomes that opportunity to have a dialogue with you separate of this conversation. And she's also going to be taking over our Instagram this week. So plenty of opportunity to engage with her. So if you don't mind, let's just start with some introductions. And Douglas, I'm going to call on you to introduce yourself first, maybe just a little bit about you and your work that's at the gallery currently. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lynette. So my name is Douglas Dale. I am a textile and sculpture artist out of St. Louis currently. I spent 5 or 6 years in Brooklyn until the pandemic hit. And since then, I've been moving to St. Louis, where I've been able to lay down a few more roots, grow a bit more. And what also stemmed from the pandemic was some gender realizations. I am non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. And so all of the work in the gallery right now is really drawing from that queer community, from allusions to drag and theater, and just sort of breaking down binaries and focusing on the information that's lost in taxonomies. So there's a lot of wood meeting textile and hard meeting soft and masculine meeting feminine, and finding that squishy spot in between that doesn't fit cleanly into a category.
Great, thank you. More on that later, because I've been talking about what's revealed in your work and what's hidden in your work as people have come in to enjoy the work. So more on that later, and how you managed to make this piece specifically. That got a lot of conversation yesterday during an event.
Well, I'll show all the secrets today.
Excellent. What's behind the curtain? What's behind the yarn? Okay, Bradley, if you'll catch that up.
Hi,
Thanks.
greetings. I'm Bradley Weyandt. I'm an artist working with textile and found objects and sculpture loosely. I came to Columbus for grad school, and I just wrapped up my time there. I come from Pittsburgh, and I sort of float in between the two right now. And my work is the work directly behind me. It's a large knit piece of tinsel and fishing line.
Which photographs very well. It was an excellent background yesterday for a birthday party.
Oh yeah, I love that. Selfie station.
She really, the person who we were celebrating really responded to that work, and a lot of photographs were taken with that background.
Perfect.
Yes. Okay, Brooks, next.
I'm Brooks Wenzel. I suppose I'm Athens, Ohio based. At least that's where my mail goes. I went to grad school down there, and I kind of ping from there to a lot of different places. So sometimes like location home is a squishy thing for me. I'm a sculptor, and my work's back here. It's kind of the chaotic mess that's like overflowing, sort of infecting other parts of the gallery. And I like to deal a lot with intervention type ideas, but I sort of follow the idea to where I go rather than material or a specific realm.
So today's conversation will be just that conversation. Feel free to chat with each other or ask questions if you have them. And if you do have questions, those of you on the call, put them in the chat and I'll get to them. Okay, so I think that the curatorial committee put your work together primarily because of its interaction with materiality and identity, sort of art as disruption in some ways. And so maybe if you could talk a little bit about your work in relation to each other. What did you learn about your work as it's here in the gallery in relationship to each other's work? And anybody can start.
I mean, I think we all came in rather cold to this, not knowing each other's work. But yeah, being in the space for myself and seeing these sort of costumes or costume, mask, clothing, and second skin. So yeah, I'm thinking of this exterior happening here and what sort of the facade of things and sort of, yeah, costume and theater. And it's really interesting pairing this really natural material with some of the more artificial flavors in this exhibition. So I think it's really, I didn't get it at first, but I think I got it now with the curatorial team.
Yeah.
Baby.
Also, the theme for Franklinton Arts District, Roy is part of that space, is identity for this month. And so a lot of that works with your work as well. So yes, and art as disruption, absolutely. And I love the performance of your installation also. We'll talk about that too, but each of you approaches installation in very different ways as well. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, you know, with like the costume piece and some of the performance elements that haven't gotten to happen on this is I have a series going on it's sort of a mockery of masculine culture. And so, you know, I've got this big purple furry monster costume that's pretty ridiculous. And just, you know, thinking about that, like, you know, bending off the comment that about like, you know, other costume elements in here, you know, we've got the contrast, I think in a way brings some of these things together where it's like the contrast of the natural versus the artificial. But I really liked what Douglas said about the idea of drag with his, because then it kind of brought in the idea of these pieces of wood being in drag and just sort of that idea of, you know, that connection with the masculine culture and sort of like turning that on its head. And so, you know, so it's like little things that don't seem super evident at first, but as you start pulling on the threads, it seems like there's more and more things connecting between these bodies of work.
Yeah. Douglas, care to add to that conversation?
I mean, I absolutely agree. When we were first setting up and, you know, you're meeting your other artists and you're just like making polite chit chat. I remember looking over at Amanda and saying like, oh, we're grid buddies and we're also nature buddies. And then you sort of talk more and just, I think the processes were also very interesting. We applied for this show almost a year ago. And so these decisions were made with bodies of work that were coming right out of pandemic and lockdown and sort of, it's been interesting to see how people have been basically making work that is the product of trauma. And so talking to Amanda about her daily walks and sort of processing an environment. And I went really into my hole and doing repetitive small tasks. And it's funny to see like Brooks's contemplation of just like, if it's broken, it's all broken, and going to like farce. And it sort of feels like everybody has been giving their own point of view as the world is slowly losing its mind, and kind of we all have different sides of the same coin reacting to everything going on around us.
Yeah, I think that's very telling that a lot of artists this year have been reflecting on similar themes, particularly either your work is a reflection of what you're experiencing or you've turned your practice inward. Excuse me. So I'm wondering where you fall on that continuum. Have you started to think about either materiality specifically and what's available to you, or have you started to think about, you know, reflecting more inward in your work, or where are you in that?
I'd start with this one.
Yeah.
So I've always loved adapting out of necessity. Like my very first art love traces back to like reality TV shows, or there's something kind of magical about being given a prompt and then you're like, all right, make it work. And so to lose an entire studio during a pandemic and like, you can only make whatever's right around you. So like a hand-bought canvas, glue, yarn, good luck, kids. And just, you know, you're sort of, I love the thrill of the high of needing to constantly pivot to whatever's around me. And so mostly I just sort of love keeping things changing. So for instance, for the Roy show, I had a couple pieces sell in the small works show, and that was very exciting. And so now my brain has been in small works land for a while. So I've been doing long hanging pieces, and now I'm chasing that high of the new thing, which is now shrinking down. And so that's where all the colorful blocks come from. And now that I've done that, I always want the pendulum to swing the other way. And now I'm thinking like, great, let's go big. Like I want to do a dining room table. It's sort of always reacting to the last thing, be it something that I made or just sort of the means that we have changed. So what are you going to do to keep on making?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's an artist that we had last October who works in yarn and was unable to find materials for a while because so many people had started crafting at the height of the pandemic. So it was affecting the materials that she was using, which meant that she had to sort of pivot and figure out different ways to work. And you're right. I mean, given the space that you have, studio space or otherwise, how are you engineering time to create and spaces to do it in? Yeah, that's very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about what we're calling the font, but your that was a big discussion last night. What can you talk a little bit about how you got there with your work and the engineering behind it?
Gladly. So I think of a lot of my work through a timeline, and so I'm basically, because I was in New York for so long, I did a lot of wall pieces. I used to do big in undergrad, and then you move into a shoebox, and same with like Tim Gunn telling you, now you need to make everything in the size of a shoebox. I learned to love my walls. And then when I moved into St. Louis, I was like, oh my God, I can move off the wall. I can like make something real. So the wall works were originally inspired by identity and presentation versus like the difference between what you present as and what you truly are. And that got me thinking about reflection and mirror surfaces and sort of a space of checking in with yourself, checking in with your body, checking in with your internal versus your external. And so the font, I call it checkpoint because I sort of love having, it's just sort of a site of like needing to confront all of these things. And so I thought of sort of a basin of water. It's based off of a sink. I also sort of love a kitchen sink, bathroom sink, because there's an implied reflection area. It is something where the more I was thinking about my identity, my presentation, myself, the sight of a sink became more and more of that ritual of checking in with yourself.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, maybe pick up the conversation where we left off of the original question about access and working and how, and because a lot of your workbooks are ready-made objects that are integrated into the landscape, but the performance is the thing, I think, with your work mostly, right? And so I was really intrigued by how the installation takes place and that it's, a set of circumstances. You were traveling, you had a team who was installing, but you had guests who were installing and the performance of it all. So it was very interesting.
Yeah, some of that was a solution to a problem that I had, but I was able, because a lot of my stuff ends up being like sort of like this chaos incarnate in some ways, where it's like there's calculated portions, but it's also laid out in a way where maybe at first it just looks like complete obliteration, but then there are details that are paid attention to. And so I was like, I had this opportunity for travel that it was going to be really hard for me to turn down, for a couple of reasons, because it was work and so forth. But I decided that like the solution for it was to try to like prescribe how it was going to be installed, and I was going to have like a few parameters that interfered with themselves, and people would be like working together with like I had descriptions of how some things went in, but a lot of it was very loose. So the installers, a few of which are here, they had to interpret, what was going on, and I feel like the nature of a lot of the work, it's conducive to that, because so much of it is sort of this like haphazard balance of like thoughtfulness and cacophony, and so I was able to lean into that and fortunately find a way that like it installed, and that became sort of this whole part of it, is like the installation itself was a performance.
Yeah, because I know installing your work here, Bradley, not having seen the space before, you were sort of interpreting the space and figuring out where and how. And I love how your works come together and occupies just a really beautiful space that plays with the light that's natural and greets visitors when they come in. So maybe some of this is the same way that I've seen you install work before, like an edge of a wall for your jacket and whatever, but how did this space sort of challenge you to think about your work and how it occupies the gallery?
Yeah, maybe this was my first sort of step outside of, I think I was really, grad school was a real privilege, and it gave me like a lot of space, and I could control this big giant white box and have a single piece on a wall and let that just breathe alone. But I think the reality of the future is, yeah, you're going to be in spaces with other artists, obviously, and that, yeah, you have to be nimble to a degree. And this is, yeah, the first time I've shown these large textiles outside of like a really, outside of the university. So it's, yeah, making me reflect on my practice and how big I want to go with things, and sort of, but also I think the work works well in here as well. I think everything worked out really nicely.
I liked what Lynette said about your jacket on the edge of the wall, because it's like we register as that as an edge of a wall, but you're also kind of like, no, that's not edge of a wall, it's wall. And so like it sort of, I don't know, it sort of like bends this space where it's like normally we would just be like, okay, that's like this little spot that's just like on the edge, but by you putting that jacket there, it forces it to become this other space.
Yeah, it's an odd little corner there, and yeah, I'm glad I put the jacket there. It looks like it belongs there.
Yeah, but it's funny how it's juxtaposed against the t-shirts, because the t-shirts are very intentionally hung, with a pipe and as a rack, as you might see in a, in a retail space or something like that. So, and particularly with the crates, that makes it a very interesting little moment over there as well. So, yeah. But I do like how everything works together. You're right. I mean, these threads that connect everything together is really very interesting for us also to see it come to fruition. So, because we are only working with the space and your images, but it looks very different in person. So I guess that sort of segues into something that I've been thinking about, and that is how much of your work is planning and how much of your work is not happenstance necessarily, because that implies some kind of randomness, but rather is maybe opportunity or is, chance. So how much of your work is planned out specifically, and how much maybe organic is a better word, just occurs. And Bradley, we'll start with you.
Let me.
In your practice, but also
okay.
in the installation, excuse me, because you're making work very specifically and in a particular way, but how much of that is dictated by, you're going along and then, oh, maybe it takes this turn, or, oh, maybe this opportunity presents itself. So is it all planned out exactly and comes out that way, or is there a moment of decision?
Yeah, in my own practice, I'm really material driven. And I like to float from material to material. So during the pandemic, I taught myself how to machine knit using yarn, and that went well, but perhaps it was everyone crafting and less yarn out there, but I thought, oh, how could I like switch this up a bit? So I made a decision, let's try different materials. So I landed on using tinsel and fishing line to create these knit textiles. Like typically with this machine I'm using, you're able to make like a knit sweater, but I'm making these large tapestries. And I was intent on making a series with the large textiles, but like I don't stick with that too long. I move on to a jacket and I cover it in licorice. Like I like to, it's still within the realm of textiles, but a totally different material. And for some reason, well, I was thinking of language and maybe candy coat and playing sugar coat and playing with that. And like, what was my least favorite candy as a child? It was black licorice. So I decided to cover a jacket with black licorice.
Yeah. I'd like to jump in on something for me on your work that connected those two things too. Is I assumed there was like this play on metal culture where you've got this like text that is like, you know, metal type language with the tinsel and the fishing line, which are it's a big contrast. And then you've got this black leather jacket that's covered in candy. And so I don't know if that was, you know, the intent of those things going together, but for me, you know, it was like very much like this duality of like the hard side of metal and like kind of this facade of it.
Totally. Yeah, you're exactly right. I'm like really interested in different like very male energy, masculine subcultures like metal or punk. But I also think drag to a degree is pretty male centered. And I sort of see these textiles conflating those two subcultures because it has this sort of drama and glitz of drag, but also uses the black metal typeface. And then I think about black metal artists and how they put on corpse paint, and it's very similar to a drag queen putting on paint. So these, sorry, no, just these overlaps of culture. Yeah.
Well, it just, you saying that reminded me further. I wish I could remember the name of it. There's an experimental film like from like the 60s or 70s that I saw. It was all of like these biker gang guys getting ready for this big like biker party, and you know, they were like getting their leathers on and like polishing up their bikes and like tuning them up. But it was also like this, you know, so it's kind of like this like masculine culture stuff, but it showed it in this light that it made the whole thing like very homoerotic.
Yeah. And
it kind of exposed like how it can kind of be both. And so, you know, I mean, so some of what you were saying, I feel like plays into that same idea.
Totally. Yeah, the leather jacket is a nod to leather culture, gay leather culture. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I feel like we're slowly bleeding into just like general performance. I have a friend who sold my entire apartment on wrestling really, really hard by just saying like, it's a drag show. Just don't think about it, just go with it. And it's sort of interesting to watch all these subcultures, the more that they become like mainstream and sort of more popularized. I think it's interesting to watch those barriers breaking down and everybody's realizing like they're all kind of feeding from the same trough, but it's sort of broadening as we, oh God, I have too many synapses firing right now. I'm thinking about like art and performance and presentation and artifice, but I think we all do seem to be like pulling water from the same well.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, to draw those conclusions, right? And when we greet visitors in the gallery, and we talk a little bit about, there's like an elevator speech, right, that we say, and we want the visitor to understand that there is continuity in these exhibitions that we put together. And so we are pulling some similar themes from things. So are you still doing, Brooks, the lost wax?
That's included, these crayons.
But are you, did you take it
Oh,
with
yeah.
you and insinuate it into landscapes and take photos, and are you putting them in boxes and?
Yeah, so as I go around, so I don't know if, who all knows, I'm sort of responding to what you were saying about like how much is planned and how much is happenstance. Like there's a bigger part of my work that's planned than might seem like on the surface. There's like a lot of little details that I thought about, and I'm incorporating those ideas, but starting with, this is a part including an ongoing project where I made these cast bronze crayon replicas. And then, by hand, I'm chasing them and polishing them. And then I made like a fake crayon label that says that it's a bronze crayon. And then as I travel to new places, I'll sneak in a store and I'll steal the gold crayon out of a box and leave one of the bronze ones behind. And then, I spin out a lot of ideas from that, but that's like, one of them is I'll take some photos like that hint at where I'm at, and maybe some icons that are around town. And then I post that on Instagram, and because the only way that you could get these crayons is to find them. Like, they're not for sale. They never will be for sale. And
it's just this planned out random act.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like you were gonna ask something, Douglas.
I was, but I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, jump in.
I love this whole project. Mostly I'm so curious of, once it's out in the wild, have you ever had an experience of it coming back? Has anybody who's like, their 5-year-old opened a box been able to track you down, or what are the ripple effects?
Yeah, it hasn't looped back to me yet. And part of it is like, I have this struggle, my ego wants to know where these go. And so there's part of me that would like want some way that this person could figure out that it's me. But I realize that as soon as they can identify that it came from me, then it just kind of collapses it as this like artistic prank. And so I kind of have to like let these go. And I have a way that I have it like stamped and cataloged. So like, if I were ever to have one come back, I would know where it started. But there's nothing that gives any indication of where it came from or how to find me, because ultimately it's like, part of this is like a big middle finger to the like art economy, because I'm purportedly giving these to a child that has no idea about like, artistic value. And so it's just between them and the material or their imagination. And so like, if I can let it float like that, where they just continue to wonder where it came from, I feel like it has more potency. And so I hasn't come back to me. I have a few times, every now and then, I don't know, like after a certain period of time, I'll spend some time like searching through forums and Googling, trying to find where like somebody might have posted about this. Like, hey, I found this thing. And thus far, I haven't found any indication of anybody like asking the greater world where it came from. So no, it hasn't come back to me. And although there's a big part of me that wants to, there's another part of me that thinks that it's more potent if it doesn't.
Okay, so to you, Douglas, then, planning and chance or organic happenstance?
Yeah, I am a high-strung individual, but I still sort of like a bit of play in my work. I think about it as like bumpers on a bowling alley. So I have too many ideas and I need to winnow them. So like, good stuff enough for my brain goes into the journals, and then the journals good enough get a sketch, and then if the best sketches are the things that I make next. So like, I don't start a project without having some idea of where I'm going. But it also means that I end up with this kind of crazy breadcrumb trail where the final piece, like there are absolute swings and changes. It's never an entirely different piece, but I definitely pivot as I am making, just because once the material's in your hand, it's not ever going to match exactly what was originally in your brain, and that's sort of the fun of it. But yeah, I can end that sentence there.
Yeah. I think, I mean, not to speak for you, but I think a lot of that is your work also. I mean, this is never, all of your labels are that indicate that, right? This could fill a space, this could be constricted to the, but
Yeah.
you know, there's a moment of, okay, I have this much space, so this is what it's gonna look like now. And
Yeah, it's very adaptive.
Yeah.
And yeah,
because we did have those discussions, Douglas even installing his work on this wall and how it is in sort of dialogue with Amanda's materials and her masks, and you know, gridding out things and spacing things and that. So even in that way, there are some variations, right, of what's going to be where and the spaces for them. Utilizing the columns for your thinner, more linear pieces even too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, when you sent us the map, I absolutely misread it and I thought I was in Bradley's spot. And so when I got there, I, you know, did the pivot and I tweak all the math. But yeah, I come in with a lot of tools and a lot of aggressive calculations and measurements and just pivot as it goes. I do actually have a question for Brooks in that same vein, because I know, as we've mentioned before, you were traveling. The awesome install team at Roy was able to finish the installation, which is so nuanced. Like there are so many moving pieces and like literally confetti. Can I ask, what is that communication like from concept to install? Like how much of it are you in direct control of and how much of it is like a Solowitian interpretation of the curation team?
It's a heavy dose of both, but there was a big reliance on like, these are the parameters that I need, you know. So I have some things that I'm like, okay, like the crayons, they go in the case with this type of crayon holder, and these other types of crayons go in the case with this different type of crayon holder. But then there were like other parts with like the Easter egg constellation where I'm like, those form sort of this constellation that hangs above, and then they like branch out to the Instagram photos that are printed, just sort of like invading all these parts of the space. And so like there's little parts that I'm like, I want this element to be like this, and then there's other parts where it's just kind of like, this goes in there, and feel free to place it how you see suitable. And so it's really on a spectrum. Some parts I'm more particular about, and so I had a little bit more direction, and then other parts it was like totally wide open. And if either of you want to jump in with, Abby helped install and Zeal back here, which I don't know if we can quite see him. If not to put you guys on the spot, but if you wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm even on there, but
You can be like that.
hey, I'm Abby. Hi. I was part of the install crew for Brooks's art, and I must say that it was challenging for me because I'm a self-proclaimed perfectionist, and it sort of gave me a license to just kind of be a little more free with my own actions. And since Brooks was, you know, in another country and the time change was a challenge, I purposefully wasn't asking as many questions as I wanted to, which were like hundreds, like, where should this go?
Right.
What should we do? And I think that one of the directions you gave us was lazily toss it over something. And so then it became for us this really fun event, you know. It was truly a joyful day. But
For us, we were given instructions to go behind you and redo things or ask questions about placement and that sort of thing. And so then I was doing those things too. The interns were like, this is so weird. I feel, can we actually do this? Sure. I mean, that's what the artist wants to do. And then we're like, is he recording it? Is there going to be the performance about this? How will everyone know what the experience was? So yes, but for other artists in the space, it was very chaotic and very unnerving of, where are they going to be? What's going to be next? Sort of like protective of work and what's going to happen and that sort of thing. So there's, with that, I'm sure you experience it. I'm not a performer or a creator, but there must be a moment of trust between you and the audience, you and other performers. You're not going to take it too far. You're not going to damage something. You know that about yourselves, and other people trust that too. But for people who don't, there's that moment of like, I don't even know what these crazy people are doing. So
there were a lot of judgment calls made, and there was a lot of empathy that I was feeling, particularly for Amanda and her crew, because I looked over and it's just this precise math project with these delicate pieces, and here we are over here like
tossing things around. Yes.
So that juxtaposition is interesting.
It was also very interesting. Yes, because Amanda has 300 masks on the wall. It's a grid. All the masks are hung in chronological order, so you can appreciate the change of the seasons. And so it is, in fact, very precise. And each mask is not labeled, but the screw has a little tag on it for the mask. And each mask has a coordinating box. So it was very precise. Yeah, we were not throwing Easter grass around on this side of the gallery. So and also that's also very interesting for us and for the interns here, and that experience of how artists are hanging things. Douglas came in, he had one day to do it. We talked extensively about what materials he needed before he got here. Everything was here for him. He hung it up, and I even talked about how he steamed the yarn in place. So
I brag about that. I came home and I was like, you're never gonna believe it. It was the smoothest install. I had time to steam.
And then Bradley's installation was in layers. He came in and installed a couple of things and spent some time with it and processed things, then came back and added another layer or two to it. So that was interesting, and a conversation. Amanda's took, of course, the most time, about 4 days of just installing these masks very precisely. And this is not all of the masks installed. There was some editing that took place, and then yours was a day of people coming and going throughout the space who, you had a professor who came and did some untangling as well and some installation. And so, it was very interesting, all the different processes for installing also the work. So we love matching up artists and work and processes and work too. It's very interesting, the juxtaposition of that. But at the end of the day, it just really is a cohesive show. Oh, great, thank you. Thanks, I didn't spit it all the way right. Okay, next, I guess what's integral to your work is a question that we often ask. What is it that's necessary for your work to take place?
I can start on that. Play is like a huge, I find myself like going through the world looking for things to ridicule, and not like mean-spirited, but just to like kind of not take myself seriously, not take this world that I'm a part of too seriously, and acknowledge the things that are just absurd. And so like so much of my ideas come out of this idea of play, and it usually like spins off something that's sort of a joke, and then I realize like go down this rabbit hole of like realizing the further implications of these things. Like the crayon idea first came to me, it was like before grad school, and I didn't fulfill it then, but that's when I first started thinking about this, and it was totally on this prank level. And then I got to thinking about like the like Crayola and the power that they have to teach our culture color, and it just kept spiraling out, and I just started realizing all these other little threads that I could pull. So just humor and play.
That is interesting, because people have had those conversations about particularly the choices of colors, skin tone, for instance. But you're right, Crayola controls our interpretation of color and what value we place on what. You only have 32 spaces. What are the 32 most important colors to put in this box, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's not true for everyone, right? Interesting.
And they've changed colors. It'll be the same exact mix.
Mhm,
And they've changed it to a new name
mhm.
for marketing reasons.
Oh, uh-huh,
And so
yeah,
it's just, it's pure, it's a purely for
Sure.
their, corporate interest.
uh-huh, yeah, absolutely. Companies do that with lipstick, by the way.
Oh, really?
Sure they do. Yeah, what was, 540 isn't, it's still 540, but it's a different color. And then it'll be obsolete and you'll try and find it. And then 540 comes back and you're like, who made that decision? The 540 came back. What's integral to your work is where we started.
I think a similar note to Brooks, I'm interested in being tricky, or I'm interested in subverting
Mhm.
Objects or material and sort of transforming things to a degree. Some of the work, I think about the object's function, like a car's exhaust pipe,
Right.
its tailpipe. I'm taking it off the car and putting it in a gallery with 3 other tailpipes, and I'm putting this strange limp pink rubber through the tailpipes. I'm just would like to be a little funny and sort of subvert the ideas that we have, especially with that piece, like 60s minimalism and sort of the macho-ness there. Sort of, yeah, taking another look at that.
Douglas, to you?
I mean, I really want to steel play because I love joy and puns. I love wordplay. But I guess curiosity, I think, is very important to me. Like, there is so much art in the universe, and it's so hard to like give time to everything. And there's a lot of what I call, for lack of a better term, like walk by art, which is beautiful. And if somebody made it, it exists for a reason. But like it's also, when there's so many things, it's easy to like label something, say I've got it, and move on. And so my goal for my work is to make sure that there's like a moment to, like, within the span of 3 seconds, you identify it, realize you're wrong, and then engage to correct yourself. And that sort of curiosity to engage with the object is like the goal that I'm always going for.
I had one of my most profound mentors used to ask, how is your work different than the thing it's most like? And that goes to what you were saying, where if people can like categorize it as something, then they're like, okay, I get it, and they're done with it. And so like if you can draw that divide even further, like what you're saying you try and do, that's usually what like draws people in.
I'm straight up stealing that. That is such a more elegant way to say what I'm trying to say. That's going in the artist statements.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so then we're kind of wrapping up. These usually take, and we usually set aside an hour for these conversations, so I don't want to go over that. But I do want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about Roy and how you found Roy. In other words, like, how did you hear about Roy? Where is it on your continuum in your career, and what's next for you? So this is your chance to plug the next show that you have. So Douglas, can we start with you?
Sure. I'm trying to remember the questions in my head of how I came to Roy, how Roy fits in, and what's next. Is that correct?
Correct, yes,
So I found Roy at the beginning of the pandemic. I was in New York and called, basically like wanted to be an artist, had no idea how to do it. And so it was at the beginning of like getting out of my bedroom artistry and into like the public artistry. So in terms of how it fits in, this is sort of me actually doing the thing I say I want to do, where, it's one thing to make your own art and have it beautiful and in your own world. And it's a whole other kettle of beans to like go to the business end and get to the installation end and like all of the work and office work outside of just making the thing. So I guess what that leads to next, I have got 2023 already slated out. I'm St. Louis based. So if you're going to be at the St. Louis Artists Guild in May 2023, I will have a show there. If you're going to be in the Lambert Airport summer of 2023, I will be there. Or if you're already here in St. Louis, my day job, I pay my bills at Duane Reade Gallery. So I'm a gallery assistant there, and we just opened up a 60 artist show with over 100 pieces that I help like curate and install, and it's a whole thing. I've got a couple pieces there, but also like, I know this is Columbus and Columbus has been great to me, but I'm also going to plug St. Louis art scene. It's fab. If you want like the full buffet tasting platter, Duane Reade Gallery, the Small Works Invitational is going to be open until the end of July.
That's good. Small works, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Either. Brooks.
So let's see, it was,
How'd you find Roy?
Roy's been on my radar for a long time. I've had a decent portion of my life in Ohio, and so I've known other artists that have had shows, and I've come to see other stuff. And then also a lot of my work is inherently unsellable, so I've been cataloging a list of places that are like more experimental or less likely to be about being able to sell it. And so I've applied a handful of years to the Roy call for entries. And then it was
Like, how do you find us? Where are we on your continuum? So like, what's next for you?
yeah. So the pandemic was actually a difficult time for me, like momentum wise in my art making. I was still I was working on some things and tinkering with some stuff, but there was also like a big hiccup. And so this is part of me getting my wheels going again. I had a huge project that I came off before this. And so from there, I'm going to be using some of those elements from the project that I was working on last winter, like a lot of latex and flocking. And I don't have a particular show lined up from here on, but I've got a lot of other things that are in the mix, and this will be my kind of rejuvenating some of the things that I was doing.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you all have done it. We talk about this all the time, that during the height of the pandemic, I don't know how you found capacity to create. You had to dig deep to find it, right? And a lot of artists are still working on reflecting that in their work, but a lot of artists' work has been put on hold, or they couldn't find time or space or materials to create things. And so, yeah, my hat's off to you that you've been able to get back to it, right? So.
Yeah, for me too, Roy's been on the radar since coming to Ohio. And speaking with people, yeah, they talk about the space on High Street. So it's really this institution, like, yeah, you're really a part of Columbus at large. So yeah, I wanted to give it a shot, and here I am. Sort of the future and what's happening now, aside from this show, if you find yourself in Pittsburgh, I have work in Space Gallery on Liberty Avenue. And here in Columbus, late July, I'll have work in a show at a newer space here in Columbus, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. And then later on in the year, I'll have work in a group show at the Neon Heater in Findlay, Ohio. So
Great, yeah, okay, excellent. Okay, so things that I didn't cover, a question that you had, or something that you wanted to talk about that I didn't get to? Now's the time.
I mean, mostly I want to thank Lynette, Roy, the whole curation team. Like, this has been an awesome opportunity. And I, as somebody who gets very persnickety about work, love the artists I've been paired with. So like, thank you for making all this matchmaking happen and helping birth a killer show.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, every month I'm amazed. I don't know why, but I'm amazed at the curatorial team. Very insightful, very thoughtful. I was part of that process, so I know what they went through. Looking at all the work, when was it available? Everyone came to the meetings with a particular slate of exhibitions and that we, workshopped and redid. So I'm really pleased every month with how it's all come together. So that's been great and challenging sometimes because I know you artists are making new work. So, you applied last August with a body of work that maybe now you're not making any longer or is no longer available or whatever. And so, but we've still been able to make the shows really work well. So thank you for the shout out for that. We had a great team. So yeah. Okay, very good. Well, thank you all so much for your kind attention. This was a good conversation. I appreciate that very much. So we're recording this and we will put it on our YouTube channel. The exhibition goes until July 1. And then we're going to be taking it down and getting ready for the next show. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye, Douglas. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.